a gibberish kind of a language. The earth started to open. Hey, bud, look at me. All hell's about to break loose.
This is why I love B-movies, because every so often you will come across a real banger. And we are talking HELLBLAZER, also known as HELLBLAZERS. No, this is nothing to do with the DC Constantine character. This one is written and directed by Justin Lee, who you may previously know as a number of films including Geek Legion and the recent shark movie Man-Eater. And this has got a stacked cast full of cult favourite actors, including Bruce Dern, Billy Zane, Tony Todd, Courtney Gaines, Adrienne Barbeau. So a real kind of stacked cast here of recognisable faces, along with a kind of a few new faces as well. And I would best describe this movie as The Void meets Pumpkinhead, but with a kind of comedic edge to it. And also throw in Tremors in a certain way, and I'll kind of explain a little bit why in a minute. But what is the story? So it focuses on a small, kind of ruralish kind of style American town. We've got a kind of a new sheriff who's come from New York, kind of getting out of the way of the big city, wanting to kind of like have the quiet life in a small American town. And we have kind of various different sort of characters. But we have a seemingly some type of demonic cult led by Billy Zane's character, who is intent on summoning some type of demonic entity and, feeding the locals ultimately to this kind of creature, along with these various kind of cultists, all of whom have murderous intent. It's up to this kind of town to kind of pull together and defend their kind of dwindling numbers against both this creature, this demon, and also these murderous cultists as well. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let us discuss what I think works in this movie. Are you looking for fun? Then you have found it with this movie. I really, really enjoyed this movie. Is this movie high art? No, it certainly isn't. It is a schlocky B movie, but hot damn, it is a fun one. This movie is a great, like I said, great fun. It was actually originally, I believe, made for Tubi, the streaming service, and it'll be out on DVD in the UK by High Flyers Entertainment, I believe, in 2023. And yeah, it's just a really fun kind of like adventure horror comedy. Now, the comedy. So this isn't an out-and-out comedy movie, but there are some extremely funny moments within this movie. Bruce Dern's character is comedy gold. Now, but there are some other kind of moments as well within this kind of film that I thought were quite funny. For example, our sheriff, who's this, comes from the big city and stuff, coming to a small town. He's kind of a movie fan, and he keeps making these movie references that no one kind of knows because they're kind of out of the loop and things like this. Again, just some little kind of subtle kind of hints of jokes I thought were quite well done. But what I liked about it is you have this cast of kind of characters, a mix of between the kind of the more established, kind of like cult favourite kind of characters, or actors I should say, and then obviously mixed in with kind of newer cast members. And you don't really know who's kind of safe and who isn't, because it's really a mix of who's the kind of like the red shirt, so to speak, and who is kind of the main character. In actual fact, I struggle to say this movie has a singular kind of a main character. It focuses much more of an ensemble, and therefore you're not quite sure who's going to get killed and who isn't. Obviously, the police are kind of the centre stage, really, but even then, it's kind of between the kind of the deputy and the sheriff, really, who is the kind of the main character. But I thought it did a good job of giving these kind of characters, making them kind of like quite distinct, quite kind of recognisable, giving them their kind of personalities. Even some of them who have a very kind of short screen time, they still seem like distinct characters, and then we kind of believe them in their roles. And even though this movie is somewhat comedic, it doesn't go overboard. It's just enough kind of kind of comedy to kind of where you can still buy into the premise, where it's not kind of too silly. The most comedic sequence is the very first one, where we see Billy Zane's character kind of summoning the demon. That is the most extreme comedy that we get in the movie. Outside of that, it's kind of speckled in here and there, but it's nothing too outlandish. Now, I really enjoyed the kind of the first half of this movie, where we're kind of getting to know our kind of characters, and we see little hints about kind of what's kind of going on. But it's still it's a relatively short film, so it's quite well paced. And I've got to say, I think the acting here, you've got some very kind of established cast members here, but also the new cast members I think do a good job as well. Yeah, I mean, the roles aren't deep, let's call a spade, but nonetheless, I think they did a good enough job here of making believable characters with a likeable kind of personality. And I do think they kind of avoid some kind of like cliches. For example, you don't have the typical kind of like douchey guy, things like that. It does avoid having some of these kind of character stereotypes that you see in a lot of horror films. This is more or less a town of individuals who are kind of quite similar and get on pretty well, and who kind of look out for one another. And I kind of quite like that, the kind of the personalities of all the kind of the characters. And I gotta say, this kind of like this small American town setting, I think it's done very well. It actually appears that, you know, we see quite a lot of kind of the town, which is surprising for a lower budget movie. So it kind of feels that it has a little bit more kind of production value than it actually has. Now, you might be thinking, with such a big cast of recognisable names, you know, surely the budget has gone there. Well, they wisely use the cast sparingly. Adrienne Barbeau, out the kind of the more established actors, I suppose, gets the most screen time. Some of them really you're only on screen for, you know, probably a minute or two at most. But I think they still make an impact within the kind of the movie. The actual kind of the second half of the movie is more we get our direct threat, and this is where it becomes a little bit more like a kind of a siege movie. Now, I mentioned Tremors, and even though this doesn't have anything to do with kind of giant worms, you have that kind of that small town kind of mentality, and the kind of the town kind of pulling together to try and overcome this kind of like this otherworldly threat. That's kind of the same thing here. But it will remind you, as I say, of the Void, with those kind of like the weird kind of cultists, and we have this kind of big demon, kind of looks a little bit like Pumpkinhead to a certain degree. So there's definite, you know, similarities, so to speak, for pre-existing kind of horror franchises that I think this movie revels on. And they kind of name drop a few others as well, which I thought was kind of quite good. Once we kind of get into the second half, it is really more of an action kind of like horror film. It's not particularly kind of gory, and it's not particularly kind of scary necessarily, but I think what the film does have is a great setup with great characters, an interesting kind of threat that we really don't know too much about, but it's also underscored, I think, by a pretty decent score, which still gives it a somewhat of an eerie feel to it. Some interesting antagonists. We have these kind of cultists that, or no regard for their own kind of well-being, and kind of will walk towards gunfire and things like that. And there are some sequences that are played for comedy and for kind of like for more of a serious dramatic tone with using that. You know, we have these cultists just like edging towards you, taking gunfire, not trying to avoid it. You think, what's kind of driving them? Then, of course, we have this creature itself, which kind of evolves through the movie, and it's practical effects. I gotta say, I thought the actual prosthetics here were pretty strong. Quite a beastly kind of monster here ripping up the town. You know, we've got everything: cultists, chainsaws, demons. It's all here. So yeah, I could have quite enjoyed this movie. Does it have any flaws? Okay, so it is a lower budget movie. It isn't the most deep film. There's not really kind of any kind of like clever writing in regard to subverting your expectations or plot twists and things like that. Yes, it's trying to be a creature on the loose kind of monster film. It's not trying to be anything other than that, but those of you who want a little bit more meat on the bones, a little bit more kind of plot, you know, it's a relatively kind of basic plot here. There is a little bit of use of plug-in effects, kind of like the CGI blood, CGI explosions. I don't know, you know, could we have had a little bit of actual real fake blood? I mean, would that have been too hard? I don't think so. A little bit of an annoyance there, I have to say. Maybe the main critique I have here is our kind of antagonists. We really don't know what their game is. I mean, that was obviously a decision made by Justin Lee, the writer-director here. and we really don't know what they're after. I mean, we're given precious little information about who these people are, what their actual end game is, and you know, where they've come from. Now, I actually don't mind that to a point, but I think we could have had some type of kind of idea about what's going on, but we kind of have next to nothing. So that kind of like, I think it could have been a little bit more explained. And I've got to say as well, it kind of forgets about certain characters, like Adrienne Barbeau's character just disappears, and we don't actually kind of know what's happened to her. There's actually a couple of end credit scenes where it looks like a hastily reshot kind of sequence, trying to just give a little bit of dialogue about, oh, maybe this happened. But, you know, the actual film kind of just leaves her and forgets her, and that's kind of it. But I've got to say, I really enjoyed this movie. This was a lot of fun. It's not a scary horror film. It's not an out-and-out comedy, but it is a good, well-paced, well-produced for its kind of budget, fun romp that I think most horror fans could probably enjoy if they're not expecting kind of high art. This is a B-movie fans, you know, ideal film, that kind of thing. I really had a lot of fun with it. And I was kind of thinking, how do I score it? You know, do I score it quite high? But is it actually critically a good film? Arguably, you know, you could argue against that. But I had a hell of a lot of fun with it. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10, but I was tempted to give it an 8. But I'll go with a 7 because I do feel maybe the kind of you know, some of the issues here, I can't honestly say it's critically an 8 out of 10, which is only 2 away from like Jaws or something. So I'll go with a 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.